I'm very confident that the law is a powerful instrument that can be harnessed to promote democracy, justice and accountability. I believe that the law is an instrument for change and progress. Yes, I do.
Section 33 of the Bill of Rights guarantees fair administrative action.
And then I knew what is no food.
Jedi Master, how are you feeling?
I thought you were the Jedi Master.
No, today is, as you know, Jedi Day. May the 4th be this year, a highly significant day. May the 3rd, yesterday, was the final pen to paper to sign an agreement, 5 billion rand settlement from the gold mining industry. How are you feeling about that, Richard?
How I feel is informed by other perceptions, other people's perceptions about it. It's a terrible responsibility to make agreements, conclude agreements that materially affect the lives of large numbers of people. And the fear that you got it wrong, that you sold their interest short, that you haven't achieved what you could have achieved, you haven't done what you should have done, is huge. You know, there is no way of knowing what's right. There is no way of knowing what is the best outcome. Should we have litigated another 5 years? Should we have held out for another billion? Should we have settled? Should we have compromised earlier and settled earlier? How do you make these judgment calls? And in truth, while you are guided by your professional kind of instincts and experience, the real test is how do other people perceive it. And in the run-up to the settlement, there was an extensive consultation process. So we met with the class representatives in Maseru and in Mthatha. We sat down with them, we discussed the issues. We've met with our civil society partners. We've met with the NDA. We've spoken with Ditchwanelo. We've met with Section 27 and other NGOs. We've met with the government and the trade unions, and the overwhelming feedback has been, this is a good settlement, we need to do this thing, we need to finalise this thing, we support you, make the call, do it. And that is a good feeling. Doubtless there will be people who will criticise it, there will be shortcomings, there will be problems, this is a compromise. But the fact that so many good people endorse it and support it is really satisfying.
I remember us driving between Port St. John's and Mthatha 10 or so years ago, and you presented to me your hypothesis and theory about gold mining, likening it to the asbestos thing. He said, when a proper cost-benefit analysis is done, as they found with asbestos, it simply, you cannot mine it. So we no longer have asbestos mining. And you suggested, somewhat sort of heretically at the time, that you thought that it was when we start doing full internalization of externalities, of both human health and environmental costs of gold mining, we would shut down the gold mining industry. Have you changed that view a bit?
These costs are they're not on balance sheet, they're off balance sheet costs. The mines aren't playing this, they're externalizing this. And gold mining is a perfect example. I mean, for 100 years, we created labour reserves, we kept them poor, we kept them impoverished, we kept them as literally labour reserves. The Bantustans were labour reserves. We took their men into our mines, we worked them hard, we generated a profit. And when after 20 years or less, they were broken and diseased, we sent them home and replaced them with fresh ones. That's how gold mining worked in this country for 100 years. And the cost has been enormous. I mean, you just make the working lifetime of a miner, I think in the 1980s, 1990s, was about 17 years. Now, if you think of we anticipate a 40-year working lifetime, 20 years to 60. Gold miners, 17. It's half a working lifetime lost right there. Watch these guys. They go home, they retire, they're sick and they die. They seldom make it past 60. They seldom make it to pensionable age. They die because of this burden. What is the impact? They brought diseases home. I mean, tuberculosis in the end of the 19th century decimated rural populations across southern Africa, decimated them. You know, the cost of tuberculosis, which was spread by the migrant labour system in gold mining, is incalculable. Hundreds of thousands of people died. You know, you look at a country like Lesotho, it's impoverished and poor. Their men have worked on our gold mines for the last 120 years. 9 generations have worked on the gold mines and being crippled and sent home. What does that country have to show for it? Nothing. Where would Lesotho have been if it weren't for mining? It's virtually impossible to calculate, but what we do know is they certainly haven't benefited. And there's been an appalling toll there. Is it worth it or not? Well, I have a feeling that the days of deep level gold mining are numbered. We're the only country in the world where we mine this deep and under these difficult conditions. And I think there's a reason for that. We could do it because we had a plentiful supply of cheap and replaceable labour, thanks to the whole system of apartheid. Now that's gone. Is it still viable? Is it viable anywhere in the world? I don't know.
You're listening to Believe It or Not with Kate Turkington on Talk Radio 702.
You may remember that an Australian mining company was given permission to mine a pristine section of the Eastern Cape's Wild Coast, which wasn't only going to be an environmental disaster, but it was also going to be a desecration of local sacred land. And were it not for the Promotion of Access to Information Act, the one they're trying to do away with at the moment, 2 honest civil servants and a very wide-awake civil society organisation called Sustaining the Wild Coast, today the Wild Coast residents might have been found pushing wheelbarrows to load waiting trucks to disperse their cherished ancestral land. That's how my next guest, John Clarke, writes about it.
When I first met you, Kate, you said, I hope you got some good lawyers along with you. Fortunately, we did. And I heard Richard Spoor being interviewed on 702 by, in fact, Bruce Whitfield. And he was in the thick of his big fight at that stage with the Anglo-Plats about that. And I thought, this guy's a guy I need to talk with. And he came along. Yeah, it just became for me then more than just a question of what's happening in the Pondoland Wild Coast with this group of community. And it became almost an emblematic story of what South Africa is all about. And through Richard Spoor's particular influence, he basically helped me contextualize this whole issue broadly about what mining means for this country. I think he drives a hard bargainer, Richard, and he sent me to go and see some of his clients.
And he said, John, listen, you're down there. Please go and meet with Victor and just apologize on my behalf and tell him I simply have got too much on my plate at that stage. And he did. He was facing a defamation suit. The Anglo-Plats were trying to have him disbarred as a lawyer, and he was fighting a very lonely battle. So with some trepidation, I went to meet Victor and what I thought would be maybe a dozen or so other people from the ex-mine workers union branch around Bizana, only to find that there were at least 70 or so ex-mine workers, some widows of men who had died, and some of their older children gathered in the old Bizana Catholic Church.
Now these are ex-mine workers who are in Bizana, who are sick from chronic lung disease, silicosis, TB, who had basically been sent home with, if they got any compensation at all, next to nothing.
Working on the mines
Working on the mines up here in Johannesburg, building the wealth of Johannesburg, and these in the gold mines. So I had to go along to these folk and try and apologise on Richard's behalf that he couldn't make it because he was so stretched, and the mining industry were gunning for him and trying to shut him up.
The only promise I was prepared to make is that I would make sure that I told their story, because that's the end of the day. All you can do is tell their story and hope that it penetrates the conscience and the consciousness of people with influence and power.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful story.
At the end of it all, they sang this song, and I'd like to just play it for you because there's an extraordinary end to the story.
Okay, let's hear that.
Now, Ezulwini is the promised land, it's heaven. Often, those of us get all muddled when we talk of heaven and earth. Now, it's that the reign of God. I prefer to see it as the place of peace, of tranquility, of resolution. And the song is, Father, give me a rod or a staff to show me to the promised land. All I could say to these guys, I said, look, chaps, don't want to raise your expectations. Richard will come back, but, I just know what's involved here. I didn't tell them this, but I really personally didn't think they had any chance of ever getting compensation. That Richard at that stage had just lost, I think, his first round of his battle to get compensation for ex-mine workers for silicosis and TB. He had then thereafter went to the Supreme Court to challenge it, and he lost there. He had run out of money, no money to pay his advocate, so he just went on him alone and said, well, he's entitled to appear. And to make up the numbers in the Constitutional Court, he kind of called me to come sit next to him. So, yeah, you can imagine here's the Constitutional Court. There's, all the mining lawyers from Anglo, Gold Ashanti and the government, looking with smirks on their face to see this guy on the other side. He's got, best he can do is pull the social worker in to kind of make up the numbers. Anyway, Richard argued his case. 6 months later, he was called back.
She comes to me, says, Chief Justice Mpobo, he wants to see you. We must go there now. I say, fine, I'm coming. But then the lawyers for Anglo, they jump up like this. They say, no, we want to come. We must. So he said to me, I want you to give a message to the family of Mankai and say how sorry is this court that he has died. And then he excused me and I was leaving. And then I saw another judge from the court who was walking towards me. His name is Judge Cameron, and he shook my hand and he said, congratulations. Then I knew we have won. We went back into the court and we waited, and the judges came in. And then the Chief Justice said to me, come stand in front here. And he said to me, look, I'm speaking to you now as the lawyer for Mankai's family. The court said this problem of lung sickness in mine workers is a very serious problem that has affected this country. The court said that the compensation system that has been there for mine workers with lung diseases is unfair and unjust. And he says it violates your rights under the Constitution. And that you, mine workers of South Africa who have become sick, you have the right under our Constitution to make a claim and to demand compensation. And with that decision, the court has changed the law of 100 years. And Mr. Mankai, therefore, in his case, has opened the door, and we can now move forward.
But what that's done, going back to that hymn, about giving me a staff, opening the way, Thembekile has opened the way for mine workers now throughout the country who can have identified the health consequences of their being working in the mines can now go back and get sue for compensation. So it's a huge issue, and I relate it because it sets a context for what the Wild Coast mining story on Kolobeni is. Because I asked the people, I said, please, can you just sing me that song again?
Okay, now you do.
Oh my word, and you can hear the change in people's emotions, and you can just hear how joyous and happy they are.
Very rarely do we have the privilege in our work to see the answers to our prayers. Well, I tell you, it was such an emotional experience for me because I was there also having recently had this wonderful decision from the minister to revoke the mining rights for Kolobeni. And the Times talked about it as a victory for the future, and Richard's been a victory to some extent to try and see what we can do about the past.
And, I thought you were going to be helping me, and I suddenly had to kind of brush up on my social work skills and say this poor guy has been put under enormous pressure. And that's where our friendship started. And what was your beef with the mining industry back then, and how do you feel about it?
Grew up in an industrial town. I have a feel and a sense of what it's like to be a blue-collar worker. Worked on construction sites, worked as a waiter. I've always had an empathy for workers. And then I did a lot of work for trade unions, representing them in many big industrial accidents, furnace eruptions, mining disasters, chemical explosions. But I think the really challenging stuff came with, it was a lead into this kind of work. It began with the Middelburg mining disasters. 53 miners died in an underground coal dust explosion in 1993. And I was the lawyer for the Chemical Workers Industrial Union. And what followed was a kind of a complex negotiation with Sasol that led to a settlement. These workers were compensated. There was a few years later, there was another explosion at the Synthol plant. I think 13 workers died. Again, a complex negotiation and a settlement achieved with Sasol. A facilitated settlement. The interaction, there was a lot of distrust between Sasol and myself, a lot of hostility. I'd been a thorn in their side. During the apartheid era, there were serious conflicts. But a friend of mine, Brian Gibson, decided to get involved and facilitate something between myself and the CEO at dinner, I think it was, in a chat, and kind of diffused that and created the beginnings of a trust relationship. And that proved to be very satisfactory. We solved a lot of problems and we did a lot of things. That led on to the asbestos litigation against Gencor in South Africa. That was pretty much a first. I mean, that was big scale stuff. It was impossible to do it alone. Teamed up for the first time with British law firm Thompson's. And they're a trade union law firm, a lot of experience with asbestos, a lot of experience with diseases and injuries. And they bankrolled the litigation, if you like. And after a pretty fearsome, bitter skirmish with Gencor, we achieved a good settlement in 2004. A very significant settlement for asbestos miners. That was followed up with a settlement with a Swiss company, Eternit, also for South African miners. And then in 2005, we started with two kind of courses. The one is picking up the issue of mines and communities, and the other picking up the silicosis issue, taking those issues. At the time, we had a bit of support from Michael Hausveld, who'd been involved in the apartheid reparations litigation. And he made available some funds to allow us to bring the test case litigation with Tembekile Mankai. And he also allowed us to start taking on, he gave us the resources to take on the platinum mining industry and start working on behalf of communities. So I got very active in the Burgersfort area and the Mokopane area on behalf of communities who were being displaced. And I think that was the first time that these mining companies had ever been directly challenged on these issues.
And it was out in the rural areas where kind of media aren't there to kind of see
no
for
media,
themselves. I remember you dragging me along, because of course I studied what the media record said, and I had some connections in the mining industry, and they had this perception of you as being this self-interested guy who's looking to make a killing for himself. And I remember me going out with you and just seeing you in the hot sun under the trees. No evidence of any of the political parties there, the ANC Youth League or anything else. No interest whatsoever. And I just thought, my gosh, what a misperception you have. And then of course that was so helpful to me, because I was so out of my depth in the Wild Coast saga, where the media have played an important role, but I remember one of the things you taught me is never let the tail wag the dog. We then found that this tail wasn't attached to a dog, it was attached to a bit of a tiger.
You know, one of the things that still surprises me is the presumption of some of these large corporations and their engineers and their egos, and the assumption that they know everything and that they know how to do it. I mean, we see it now in the Wild Coast with Sandrail. You know, you engage with them and say, look, you know, are you sure you're doing this the right way? This is not going well, this looks problematic, there's trouble brewing, you know, things are not going to go well. No. We've consulted with Land Affairs, we have the procedures, we're following the rules, we know what we're doing. And it was the same with Anglo Platinum back then. Arrogant, bullying people, you know, not used to getting their way with government, with communities, with local authorities. Convinced that any opposition to them is bad faith, presumptuous, self-interested, extraordinary arrogance, which kind of insulates them. It allows them to write off all opposition and write off all cries of pain and suffering as pretense and self-interest. You know, it allows them to ignore people's pain, people's suffering. It allows them to dehumanize people, because these are all bad, self-interested people who are, out of base motives, trying to block and frustrate these corporations who know what is good and who know what's best, and who believe their own propaganda and bullshit. And you take on those kinds of people, and their first response is almost invariably aggressive and threatening and bullying. And the only way to overcome that is to stand firm and not back off. What you will see from bullshitters, and there are many bullshitters and opportunists in the world, is that when you confront them, they'll back off. So if somebody arrives there, he's going to act for this community, he's going to act for mine workers, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. You know, he's a bullshitter when the first time he meets resistance, and the first time he meets opposition, and the first time he gets really challenged and threatened, he backs off and goes away and disappears. To overcome that, you've got to stand fast. You've got to stand firm.
Well, I mean, that's why I really appreciated meeting you, because I'm a bit of a sort of a tender-minded, tender-hearted social worker who tends to see too much and can be easily manipulated. And it was a bit like you kind of came and gave me a bit of spine to kind of realize that I know the profile of the caricature that you talk of, I've now met in the person of Mark Caruso.
Mark Caruso, the Australian CEO of MRC, called me, presumably concerned about the declining fortunes of his mining company on the Australian Stock Exchange as a consequence of all the bad press.
Gun do something tangible, mate, as we say in Australia. Piss or get off the pot, is what we say. And you can quote
and fair enough.
With it, mate. Go and do something. Stop chopping trees down and writing letters. Go and do something, and we will guide you.
Involved in this, watching the situation, involved in it, social worker John Clarke. Good evening to you and welcome. Government says, and most notably its mineral and energy spokesperson Becky Khumalo says Mineral Commodities, the company, is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, therefore it could be relied to act upon as a responsible corporate citizen. I suspect you're not buying that, are you?
Well, I mean, it's a venture capital outfit on the Australian Stock Exchange. Australia has much more liberal rules, it's discovered, than the South African Stock Exchange to raise capital for high-risk ventures than we would allow in South Africa, and that's really what they've been doing. We found that if we started investigating and looked at their website and looked at the Australian Stock Exchange rules, that these guys were really lying to their own shareholders.
Is this a fait accompli? Or
No,
are
it's not.
you fighting a losing battle here?
Well, I mean, thankfully we have the Constitution. There's a fundamental human rights at stake here. The Human Rights Commission are furious as well, I believe, because they've basically been snubbed by the Department of Minerals and Energy. I initiated a human rights inquiry in that and called them in to investigate, last year already, and the Human Rights Commission have been very worried because DME and the Department of Environmental Affairs and Land Affairs are clearly not singing off the same song sheet.
All right, the Mineral and Energy Minister is going to the region on Friday. What do you want her to say to the community?
Well, I would like her to take the Minister of Environmental Affairs and Tourism with her and the Minister of Land Affairs with her so that the community can see that government is being accountable to exercise cooperative decision making. At the moment,
There's a process. I mean, I was speaking about Sasol earlier. I mean, from my earliest days, I banged heads with Sasol. But after 10 years, after this facilitated introduction and this engagement, the relationship changed. I matured and grew up a little bit, began to understand it's not all personal and that they are not the evil empire and, that they're corporations and they do what corporations do. The same thing happened with Anglo Platinum. I mean, after these vicious skirmishes, there was a change in the leadership of the organization. I think the organization recognized that there was a very high price to pay for this kind of arrogant, adversarial attitude. I mean, their relationships with the communities were falling down. There was international media attention. They became the spotlight. And if there's something I'm proud of, it's kind of putting the focus in South Africa on the relationships and the impact of mining and communities. Mining in the Rustenburg area started 10, 15 years earlier. Kind of this rapid industrialization started 10, 15 years earlier. And it was met with almost no resistance. We see the consequences in Marikana and the massive social and economic dislocation in those areas. It came to Burgersfort and Limpopo a little later on the eastern and the northern limbs. But we weren't there at the start, but 2005, 2004, 2005, we were there, we had some support, we were offering resistance. Brought attention to this issue. I mean, there were a number of television programs and documentaries and news items and international concern. And that's kind of grown, and this issue around mining and communities has become something that's populated by NGOs. There's benchmarks, there's a number of organizations that have developed and are concerned with this particular theme. You see it in the Pondoland and up here. And if it weren't for the fact that we kind of stood up then and engaged and fought these things and drew attention, this process might have only have happened years later. Maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. Maybe we'd still be sitting where we were back then with communities being trampled. Now it's an agenda. Now it's an issue. There are changes reflected in the NPRDA as a response to that resistance and those struggles of those communities. We've made an impact, but what is interesting is I was talking about Anglo, and the cycle, how it went with Sasol and how it's gone with Anglo. Respect. I mean, when Ben Magara took responsibility on the Anglo side, a change in attitude, a refreshing, different way of doing things, and we got on. I mean, the personal venom, the moral grandstanding, the bullshit took out of the relationship. We had to deal with their real problems, they with our real problems, and the relationship has improved. In gold, we've had a similar process. But what's interesting is you spend 8 to 10 years fighting a battle with a mining company, and eventually you come to some kind of relationship of mutual respect where you can actually do and achieve things that accrue to everyone's advantage. You move to the next company and you will not fucking believe it, it's as if they haven't learned a thing. So you bump heads with a company like Samancor Chrome, Ikapa, Northern Cape. It's the same thing. It's the stereotypical, aggressive, we know best, you're an opportunist, we'll teach you a lesson, we'll out-tough you kind of attitude. It is as if they do not learn.
Well, it's hopefully, that's perhaps because they're too much dominated by their lawyers. And let's talk a bit about the legal profession, because I remember teasing you about the fact that the problem with lawyers is just that 95% give all the rest of them a bad name. And I remember you chuckled about that. I've still yet to find anybody sort of tease social workers with something kind of clever. But
August 2008. Minister Sonjika arrives at Pondoland High School to try to convince local residents to accept the government's decision to award the mining license to MRC and Zolkom. Patrick Caruso, the younger brother of Mark Caruso, and the South African representative of MRC refused to be interviewed.
Titanium reserves in the whole world. Isanusia sayiluza singurhulumente. Sayiluzela kule tourism. Aqola mntakwethu andilwi nawe. Ndilwa ne principle. Isanusia sayiluza sayinikezela. Kwenzeka ntoni eSolusia ngoku? Hlala belungu bodwa. It has been declared an exclusive area. Zaninika ke umzekelo omnye qha walento yenzeka apha ePhonobeni. Zayeka la esemhlonhlo. Izwe emhlonhlo. Kusenzeka lento yenzeka apha. I-community enye ibheke ngapha, enye ibheka ngapha. Ndathi xa ndisabela kwathiwa kukho umuntu onguRichard Spoor oyehlule phakathi i-community.
The minister has chosen to allocate them the rights to a 8 billion rand resource on other people's land. It's those people living in that area who are going to bear the cost of mining. But the 8 billion rand and the profit generated from extracting and selling that is going to go to an Australian company. Now, why?
The funny thing I found is that when you were being attacked by Minister Bulelwa Sonjika, some of your legal adversaries or your fellow professionals who were ready to go and support you lodging a complaint against the minister for that. So I now say it's not just about that 95% gold and the rest of bad name. Richard Spoor and a few other 5%ers are the ones that redeem the legal profession and see it as potentially an instrument for social justice. So talk to me a little bit about the law, because you are seen to be a bit of a loner, somebody who likes to work on his own, who's impatient, who just runs so far ahead of everybody else that they just kind of struggle.
Well, you know, I think one of the more embarrassing debates I was ever involved in was at university, where Professor Helton Cheadle, he was a kind of a pioneer of the labour movement in South Africa, came down the modern trade union movement in South Africa. Him, Finlayson, Paul Benjamin, a couple of other guys. And John Brandt, actually, who's played a critical role in this gold mining thing. Pioneers of labour law and this first democratic movement of trade unionism that emerged in the late 70s. He came down to the University of Cape Town and he came to talk about law as an instrument of struggle, an instrument that could be used to kind of change society and influence its course and direction. At the time, I held far more radical left views, and I thought that the law changed and accommodated struggle in order to blunt the revolutionary thrust from drum, that it was a means by which struggle was accommodated and domesticated. And I got into this heated debate with Helton as a young student, saying his perspective, his idea that law could be an instrument of struggle and change is kind of deluded, and I'm ashamed almost of the kind of things that happened. As it was, he later employed me.
You did articles
at Cheadle Thompson. No, I did articles of Priscilla John, but as a young attorney I joined Cheadle Thompson and became a partner there, and I worked there with Paul Benjamin and doing trade union work and labour work. There I was introduced to the field of occupational injuries and diseases by Paul, which has really been the core of my professional life. And I'm extremely grateful for that. But the law is a very powerful instrument. You can achieve a lot through law. I mean, people see these big cases we're involved in, the asbestos, the gold, the listeriosis, the coal mining, the struggles of these communities on mining. But in the background, we are continuing to look for opportunities to litigate cases, to change and develop the law, particularly around compensation and injuries. We have a process where a lot of people come to us, individual cases, pour in. Generally, we just give a bit of advice. I'm sorry we can't help you, but this is what we suggest, this is what we suggest. We try and steer people in the right direction. We can't help in most cases. But out of those cases, every now and again one comes up. And you say, this is it. Here is the case that we can use to make a point. Here is the case that do something. So we've been working on trying to develop the law around questions of strict liability for breach of a statutory duty, which is really an English concept, almost alien to our law. We're trying to bring it back. So we want to find means of making it easier for workers to recover damages. We don't think, as a matter of principle, our view is that if I'm employed by you to make a profit, and in the course of my work I'm hurt or injured, my right to compensation shouldn't be determined by whether I was negligent or who was negligent. This is a cost of doing business. I'm like, the machine breaks, the employer doesn't think twice about fixing it. But if a worker breaks, suddenly the whole question is, well, is it his own fault or not? I mean, workers are, in the industrial sense, are kind of cogs in a machine, and it's a cost of industry and mining. It damages people, it hurts people, and we're continuously looking for issues to take up, to use, to change, to move things, to shove things along. So I do think law is great, but law and the legal profession are not quite the same thing. Most of the settlements that we achieve are not negotiated with lawyers, but with the companies directly. Most lawyers are pretty indifferent. They take instructions from their clients. They do their job. They win, they lose. They're not stressed if they lose. They're not particularly happy if they win. They really don't care. So they don't have, I think it's a phrase that you like to use, so many skin in the game, I think you call it. They don't have any skin in the game. They have no real interest in the matter. There's no personal commitment or involvement here. You'll see them. They're fairly cynical kind of people. They don't get. They have no emotional investment. They have no financial commitment to the whole thing. So lawyers are not great people. There's no use appealing to a lawyer's kind of better senses or.
Litigation is a cognitive rational process. The law, once enacted by Parliament, is where the heart lies. So it's the legislature which articulate the values and the principles. When you get to a question of litigation, well, then it's a question of interpretation. Because I was very privileged to be able to sit and film you in the High Court last week with Tembeka Ngitwebi.
Clarke and I appear for the applicants, and together with Mr. Richard Spoor. And in summary, what my clients contend will be the consequence of the mining operations is physical displacement, economic displacement, loss of access to the land, loss of access to grazing rights, loss of access to water. And on the cultural side, what my clients have contended in the founding affidavit is that their graves are also located within the proposed mining area. And so even if the graves themselves will not be relocated, the point is that the connection between my clients and their graves will be disrupted by the impact of the mining. The entire way of living is about to be disrupted on a massive scale. What is an issue is that those who are affected should have an opportunity to consent to the decision that will be made impacting on them. And they make the point clear that it is not enough to go to a meeting and the majority votes on a particular aspect. If a decision has an impact of tearing the community apart, even the majority would likely not support the decision because of the cultural linkages that exist and the cultural bonds that bind these communities together. The final argument will be made by Mr. Spoor.
I have the privilege of making the applicant's submissions on the alternative relief. So if the court is not with us on the community's right saying no to mining, we're looking for a declaratory relief to the effect that the minister may not grant a mining right over the land unless or until compensation, which has either been agreed to by those affected or decided or approved by a competent court or through arbitration. The intention of the mine is to mine those sand dunes along this 22-kilometre stretch of land. It will be open cast mining. They're not going to dig a shaft and go underneath. They are literally going to crawl across the landscape and devour these dunes, extract the minerals and regurgitate them at the back end. The impact for the community will be significant. Essentially, the community is going to be displaced from their grazing land, where their cattle graze. That grazing will be consumed. They will be displaced from their ploughing lands. Those are the lands where they grow crops and food, beans, pumpkins, maize, to sustain themselves. They will also be displaced from their homes. As your ladyship has heard, there are approximately 75 families living in this area, of whom 68 have joined these proceedings. Some 600 people, of whom 300 approximately are children, will either lose their homes or find their homes located in and amongst this extremely disruptive mining activity. Their water resources are likely to be depleted and damaged, which the mine is entitled to do. There will be enormous social and economic harm. The linkages between this community, cultural, social, economic linkages that sustain this community, will be disrupted and destroyed. What is extraordinary about this mining rights application is that nowhere in that application and nowhere in any of the documentation provided by the mine or the government, anywhere in this record, you will not find a reference to what is going to happen as a result of this massive disruption. How are they going to live? Where will they grow their food? To the extent that people must be displaced, where are they going to be moved to? Bizana, Mthatha, Port St. John's? What's going to happen to them? Where are they going to live? How are they going to make an existence? None of that, my lady, not a single detail has been provided in advance of this mining application. It's difficult to imagine how the minister is going to decide whether the money is adequate and whether there will be unacceptable pollution, ecological degradation or damage to the environment. How does he do that if he doesn't know what compensation will cost?
My point of concern is what the applicants are asking this court to do is to fundamentally alter the discretion that the minister has in terms of section 23. Isn't that so?
My lady, I'm suggesting that it's implicit in this that the minister should require that compensation be determined in advance, because that question also impacts on the viability of the mining operations. My lady, moving people and resettling people is a really expensive business if it's done to standard. Now, we've got a whole mining plan and a whole mining budget, but if there's no agreement on one of the biggest cost components, which is land and the cost, how do we know that the company has the means to do this? 22 kilometers of coast, wild coast, some of the most beautiful coastline in the country, extending 1.5 kilometers inland. What does that cost? If you were to buy that, not for mining, where you get it free, but if you were to buy that for yourself, what would you pay for that? Tens of billions of rands. Now, obviously the mine doesn't intend to pay tens of billions of rands in compensation, because then their entire operation would be non-economic. They need to get hold of that land and demolish it for free, or as cheaply as possible. But that quantification hasn't been done. The relief that we're seeking is not going to frustrate mining. A ruling to this effect will compel mining companies, like the respondents in this matter, to do a proper cost-benefit analysis before they launch on one of these exercises. And critically, a ruling to this effect is going to bring in legal, judicial oversight over this process and address what is a very, very serious problem that has caused great harm to the people of this country and could potentially cause a great deal more harm, if it pleases the court.
Effectively, the products produced from the company's operations are used in abundance on a day-to-day basis, in particular for zircon, which is strongly underpinned by growth in China, and also in the titanium market for the production of pigment, which is used both in developing and developed infrastructure.
For any exploration company, the first test is graduating from development to fully fledged production. We always saw Tormund as the great opportunity for mineral commodities to make that transition.
These mineral commodities is extraordinarily fortunate to have Tormund as its starter project. It is unique insofar of its grade, being the highest grade mineral sands deposit in the world and one of the lowest cost operators in the world, given the grade. Zolobeni, given the scale, it has the potential to be one of the largest low-cost operating mines in the world for the production of mineral sands.
Between 2004 and 2010, local management developed that project. The final regulatory work started in early 2010 and was completed by August 2012, which enabled the company to go through the final capital raising and commence the construction of Tormund in January 2013, meeting the targets of being on time and on budget, allowed commissioning to be completed by the end of 2013 and full production to commence in 2014. Tormund has been funded largely by shareholder equity, made easier by the fact obviously the capital investment for the project was significantly lighter than many other comparable mineral sands projects.
Has commissioned and operated the plant for some 5 months, is now looking at debottlenecking and upgrading the existing secondary concentrator plant from its current nameplate capacity of 42,000 tonne to circa 50 to 55,000 tonne.
While we're transitioning and developing the Tormund project, that's obviously given us the opportunity to really focus on the outstanding issues, and primarily environmental and social issues of Zolobeni.
Zolobeni is a much larger project, both in scale and resource size, and therefore gives longevity to the company's future. So accordingly, it is a company maker.
The regulatory work and approval will probably take up to 18 to 24 months thereafter. And we see the opportunity, therefore, to commence construction of Zolobeni within the next 3 to 5 years. The benefits flowing from Tormen and the great dire need of the local community for jobs and for development and opportunity are becoming inexorable, and we certainly see that in a short period that groundswell will move towards to regulatory action and for the full approval of the plant in the next 3 years or so. As the cash flows come into mineral commodities through the Tormen project, we're really able to accumulate a cash pile and obviously create the capacity for debt raising within the mineral commodities to invest in future projects. Not only does that create the opportunity in the first instance to pay significant dividends to shareholders, but creates the capacity for significant future investments, both in the expansion of Tormen and developing any other projects that the company may identify.
An aspect of law that people don't understand is that the legal process, pleadings, applications, answers, replies, discovery, that process facilitates resolution. So I could sit across a table from some mining company and argue about some big issue. We are so far apart, there is no prospect of us ever finding each other. But if we are litigating, I state my case, they answer, I reply. We file expert reports, they answer to those. We file discovery, they file discovery. We comment on that, we engage it. What we're doing is I'm learning his case, he's learning mine. If you wish to resolve a problem, you need to close the gap between you. You need to close the gap in understanding and appreciation. If I think my case is overwhelmingly strong, he thinks his case is overwhelmingly strong, we'll never find each other. But if I have, in fact, conceptually, theoretically, if I have a perfect understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of my case, and he does too, and we have the same understanding, it's incredibly easy to reach an agreement. We just say, well, I've got a 40% chance of losing, he agrees, the claim is for R1 million, okay, we'll settle for 600, done. Because we have the same understanding. So the litigation process is really important to bring the parties together. But then they've got to read it and understand it. You'll see in the way we plead. We tell a story, we tell a narrative. Our pleadings, I think, in this silicosis class action are compelling. You can't read that without coming away saying, sure, there's a case to be answered here. This is a seriously difficult case to answer. And I think in this Kolobeni matter about the June mining, we've done the same thing. I mean, our partners, the LRC, have done extraordinary work in kind of fleshing out this case. So when the judge, who takes her job really seriously, reads this and she sees the context, this thing is not just about dry abstract principles anymore, it's about a much bigger picture. And I think a lot of lawyers miss that. I think lawyers are too preoccupied with a kind of a mechanical, interpretative, kind of nice point type of argument. I don't think they recognize, I don't think they attach enough weight to the story and the context.
Well, what I like about it, Charles Dickens' famous thing about the law being an ass, in that context of that story, not of a twist, he is saying the law is not informed by experience. He says, the law presumes that your wife is subordinate to you. He said, well, if that's what the law says, the law is an ass. What I love about what you've done is that you've given it that experience. But at the same time, there's a bit of a contradiction what you said in terms of this issue of discovery and how coming together. In my particular instance, Mark Caruso is suing me for R2.5 million on a slap suit, a defamation suit. And I was hoping you'd said, just in the process of discovery, this thing's never going to get to court. When he got all the arguments, he upped it to 5 million. So in that instance, it doesn't seem to be working. So pardon me declaring that personal interest.
There's no bona fide dispute here. I mean, he's using litigation as a tool to harm you.
Yeah.
So it's not as if there's a genuine dispute between you. There is none. This is just, this is his idea. It's like, child may throw stones at somebody or...
What's quite clear to me, and this relates to our national crisis that we've had under Jacob Zuma, is what I call lawfare. It's strategic litigation, to abuse the law, to evade justice. And, they say that in warfare, truth is the first casualty. In lawfare, it seems like the whole logic is to take the truth hostage and to hold it hostage so that it doesn't get into the public domain because it's supposedly subjudicated. And I'd say something about that.
I mean, this gold mining litigation, to establish the right to sue the mining companies, it took us 6 years, 2005 to 2011. This litigation to a conclusion, we began in 2011, it's 2018, it's 6 or 7 years. We haven't even touched on the merits in this class action thing. We have illustrated the merits in our papers, but all the objections and the defences are procedural, not substantive. They're delaying tactics. So right now there's an appeal pending in the SCA. If the companies wish to, they could, that appeal gets dismissed or a decision is made, you raise another procedural objection and another and another and another, and you use the law to delay it. But, if you're there for the plaintiffs, you've got to be very strategic in the way you plead things. You know that if it's in their interest to delay this thing, which it often is. If you want to avoid objections and so on, well, cut your cloth, design it properly, keep the issues simple and crisp and try and anticipate those kind of blocking strategies if you want the thing to be driven. So, law is all of those things. But, as a lawyer, you go into this thing, you know what they can do. It doesn't help crying about it. If you're foolish enough to raise some kind of point that can be used to delay, well...
there's that saying, justice delayed is justice denied. Well, from my perspective as a social worker, I've seen too many instances of the delay getting so bad, it's injustice compounded. Now, back to the Wild Coast. 12 years ago, I was interviewing and talking to one of the Sangomas, Gabalani Boyisa, whose father had fought in the Ponda uprising, and I asked him what his ancestors had to say about this mining. And he said, we've been told.
This mining thing, we have been we had people interviewing us about these things, but we said, no, we can't look at this kind of thing because this thing, it seems like it's not interested to the community, also to the earth, because we've got the graves there, which means we're sitting with our ancestors in front of us. We're not same like the other people living in cities. Us, we bury our bodies in front of the house. If in anything, I don't understand, maybe someone got sick, I got a right to go and sit in front of them there by the house and pray, pray in front of the grave. So when I turn back, I will know exactly the help I must go and collect and help. Or no, the best way, this person has got a problem inside, he needs a hospital to go and get cut or whatever.
And what is the Amadlazi, what are your ancestors? Have you consulted about this, what's happening with this proposal for the mining? Is that something you have you prayed that one with people? Have you prayed about that?
Yes, I did many, even until today. We always praying, please Amadlazi, Makosa Makulu, help us. Because we thought we are all together now. Because before we know, you Madlozi, you were very strong before. Come as strong today again because you see, and they say truth to us. We mustn't let this land be mined because those operators is not going to be our operators in our community. It's going to be operators coming from Zimbabwe where the mining was happening, which means even when they're going to train the locals, it's going to be a big disaster of our ancestors. It's going to be destroyed. And we're not going to understand, and poverty is going to happen, and we understand that. And I understand as a Sangoma local member of Mtendo area of Amadiba area. I understand that fully. It's not only me, all of Sangomas of the community, we meet together, and we discuss about this thing. And then we pray to our ancestors, and all of us, we see this thing, it's a big disaster.
This mining. He said, we've been told we must defend the land. I knew that this was like headed for another major bloodshed and violence. So it wasn't me just being all romantic about these things. This is really serious stuff. Anybody who knows South African history, that's what it was. And I said to him, but Jabulani, you don't need to go to war, you can go to court. He's since passed away himself. There has been violence, there has been death. Not from the Amadiba Crisis Committee side, but from the mining company, who see that they've run out of all options in law, so they think they can use intimidation. And so it's now not just a question of strategic litigation in terms of mining law. We're now dealing with criminal law, and we're dealing with a situation in this country where the rule of law has been so eroded. I just wonder whether the lawyers can pull us out of this.
Well, I mean, it's more than 12 years down the line, the mining hasn't started. I mean, you talk about delay and frustrating and blocking. I mean, we have run circles around MRC. I mean, you think if this matter went to court within 18 months of this dispute arising, the court would have made a ruling one way or the other, said yes, mining can go ahead, you think we'd be better off? No, we wouldn't. So yes, it's exhausting, it's expensive, it's difficult, it's emotionally draining, but so far so good. We're holding the fort. In fact, I think we've outlasted MRC. I mean, you know, they've backed off, they claim to have sold their interest in the company. We're winning this battle. And what we're doing is the climate is changing. So, you know, winning this battle in court 12 years ago is one issue. Winning this battle today is another. So, is it all wasted time, and is this to be regretted? Sure, we'd like a neat, positive, quick outcome, but we're dealing with a very important challenge and some fundamental legal and social issues around mining and the right to mining and the point of the NPRDA and the rights of communities. You don't quickly rush to court and get an answer. You're assuming there are answers. There are simple answers to these things. The answer depends on the context, depends on the times, it depends on what's come before, it depends on how this thing is unfolding. And right now, it's unfolding pretty much as we want to see it unfold. It doesn't guarantee success for us, but it would be a mistake to assume that quick justice here would have accrued to our advantage. And in this instance, we're the ones who are defending. We're the ones who are defending. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it.
In social work, you know, the axiom we work from is there's no such thing as problems. There are only people with problems. And I obviously need to individualize and bring it down to earth. And from that point of view, if it doesn't work for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged,
but look at the real crisis down there. I mean, there are people living inshore, living outside the Amadiba area who would welcome the jobs and the opportunities that come with mining. Hey, it improves our lives. There's less unemployment. But who's it going to hurt? It's going to hurt the community in that area, whose lives, whose society and whose economies and way of living have completely disrupted and destroyed. But there are people who stand to benefit, and quite handsomely. Zolco and the entrepreneurs who've been driving this thing, they stand to benefit. The entrepreneurs, the politicians are the people cheering this process on. And the people who stand to lose the most have no voice.
Exactly.
And that inequality generally means that the mining triumphs, the poor get screwed, these well-placed elites benefit enormously. And so it's perpetuated. So our role as lawyers and as social workers and as activists is to change that equation, to make sure that the people who are going to pay the cost are represented, that they do have voices, that their side of the argument is heard. And that changes the equation.
We have yet to find an equivalent situation to the Amadiba community anywhere in the world where a rural community has given up their lands to make way for a mine, who've actually had a overall optimized benefit to the people that were moved. Surely the first thing we need to do if we're going to justify mining in such situations or anywhere is to have good case studies. And for 12 years I've been asking where there is such a thing from people in academia, and it's not come up from anywhere. The second to last question for you, Richard. some of the beneficiaries now of the settlement are from that very area, from the Bazana area. I still have that incredible kind of like moving experience of being there with you in 2011 when the Constitutional Court, found for Tembakai and how the people sang, and they were so, and then becomes, you've now established the legal hardware of establishing the law, you've got the precedent set. Now these 5 billion rand is going to come, and that's perhaps going to help benefit those people so they don't need to mine them. The question now is about the software. The soft issues, speaking now as a social worker to justify my profession, what thoughts do you have about how we can make sure that we don't end up with the solution being basically worse than the problem? Because we've suddenly got a windfall of money coming into communities, the scavengers are going to look all sorts of ways of actually doing. And the same applies not just to your thing, it's about the life of so many people who have now got settlements. Like when people win the lottery, they need to have counselling and support, when they're not used to having all this money.
Well, first thing is, as significant as a settlement is, it doesn't compensate people for the full extent of their loss. I mean, it doesn't come close to achieving justice. I mean, this is an appalling legacy. There is no private legal settlement that's going to undo the harm and make adequate redress. So, it's not going to put people back to where they should be. I mean, this is a. I don't wish to exaggerate the import of the settlement. We hope it will make a difference to people's lives. But we have over the years learned a lot about these kinds of schemes and how they might work and how they can be implemented in ways that don't attract scavengers. So a lot of work has gone into the design of the trust and setting the thing up, and a lot of lessons have been learned to minimize these risks. I think the real risk lies between the claimants and the time that the money gets paid to them. Our experience is that rural people, and the literature suggests women in particular, they're very careful, they're very thoughtful, they're very considered with what they do with their money. And they're quite capable of handling it themselves. Men, a little less so. But I don't have I'm pretty confident that people can deal with whatever is coming to them. What we have been trying to engineer is to make sure that this process is efficient, effective, and that people are not, robbed and cheated along the way. And we know from bitter experience, we know from the statutory compensation schemes, that there are schools of sharks and hunters out there trying to exploit poor people. And poor people are extremely vulnerable to being exploited and cheated. So I think we are alive to the risk, but I think these things can be mitigated by a proper design of the systems that you put in place.
And I think it's also institutionally, the media, all my good friends on Facebook who are going to watch this thing, you folk don't think that you've got a nice big sensational case and that the media work is done by sitting in courtrooms filming court cases. The media is going to play a healing role in this thing as well. So we need all those good journalists to keep doing it. The last question I have is from one of my other Jedi Knights on Jedi Dale. I call her Leonie Dubert. It asked Richard, how did you find the time, the energy, and the tenacity to keep going? In the darkest moments, what made you get up, put on your gloves, and climb into the fray and be resilient?
The best part of my job is the relationships of trust that you develop with people and communities. Nothing motivates people and nothing inspires people more than being trusted. If I put my faith in you and I'm saying I'm depending on you, I'm looking to you. You don't want to betray that trust. So what keeps me going is the trust that others place in me. I mean, sometimes we lose, sometimes we fail, but not for want of trying.
Well, the other answer to that question is, for me, both Richard and I are married very wisely. And lastly, Richard, I want to say, it was a great moment where Pasika called, Pasika Shiza, to say that Tembakai's widow, he is so pleased she hasn't herself passed on, and that this settlement has now happened within her lifetime, because she's not well apparently. And so thank you so much for coming along and making my life so interesting 12 years ago. And I hope if journalists are watching this, I don't mind if you miss it. The one person I really hope will get to see this is Mark Caruso and his lawyers, and say, guys, there's another way.